Today, I'm going to speak about the spiritual ego. You know, that thing when you're on the spiritual path and you're reading things, you're learning about your ego, you might be even transcending it. And every once in a while, you have these bursts where you feel like unity and expansion, and you feel like you're really evolving. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, bam, your ego shows back up. And actually, it never disappeared in the first place. It just shapeshifted. So if that's your case, if your ego keeps sneaking back into new forms and you're struggling with your spiritual ego, this video is for you. I'm going to share 3 of the most common ways the spiritual ego will show up on our spiritual path. And then I'm going to share 3 tips on what to do when our ego just keeps coming back in a new form. Let's do this. So let's start with the basics. What is the ego? A lot of people think that the ego is just somebody who's, arrogant and full of themselves. And yes, that is the ego. But the ego is also that little voice that tells you you're not good enough, you're not as evolved, you're looking at other people who are spiritual and thinking that they're so much more evolved and that you can't do it. Basically, the ego doesn't care whether you are better or worse than somebody. The ego just cares that you're separate. It cares that you feel like you are you and that everybody else is somebody else. And in spiritual terms, the ego is whatever is keeping us from feeling like we're part of the whole or that we're one. And in a lot of spiritual traditions, full enlightenment comes when we're finally able to dissolve that separateness, that ego. And it's not like you stop existing. It's just that you realize that everybody and everyone is part of you and that you are part of everyone. We're all connected. But it also means that if you're not fully enlightened, like me, well, it means that you have an ego. So now that we got that straight, let's talk about what are the common ways that the ego will sneakily find a new form, especially when we're deep in our spiritual growth. So the first one is the label trap. In the spiritual world, this is very common. We have tons of labels out there, introvert, extrovert, empath, light worker, my human design. And I love a good label. I use them a lot and they've really helped me learn and grow and learn about myself. The only problem is when they make you start to feel special or they make you feel like you're part of an exclusive club. It's when you start catching yourself feeling things like it's us versus them, or I'm more special, or I'm more aware, I'm more empathetic. Well, in a way, that's just causing more separation, and that is the ego. Again, I'm not against labels. They can be really helpful, but just make sure that you use them to grow and not to box you in. The second one is spiritual superiority. And it's really sneaky. And unfortunately, I'm talking from experience here. I did a 10-day Vipassana retreat, which is all in silence. And it was amazing. It was really life-changing. And I'll probably do a video on this later on. But after the retreat, my little voice went from I'm not enough to, oh, well, I'm better because I meditate now. And even it got worse. It was like, I'm better than other people that meditate because they're not doing Vipassana meditation. And I was like, where is this coming from? It's really embarrassing, actually. But I want to talk about it because it's an important part of this whole spiritual growth and process. And I'm working through it myself. And I actually want to remember that, you know, people who aren't even on the spiritual path, people who are just living their lives, they might actually even get spirituality and the meaning of life a lot better than me. But it's not even that. That's not even the question. The question is just that we really need to be careful when we start growing and evolving, not to start making that be a new thing that our ego clings to. And here are a couple of examples of how that spiritual superiority might manifest. For example, maybe you don't eat meat, and that's great, and you do it for spiritual reasons, and it's really something that's personal. But if you start judging others if they are eating meat, well, then that's your ego. Or maybe you stop drinking alcohol. That's what I've done recently. But then sometimes I catch myself judging people who are drinking, and I'm thinking, why can't I just do this for myself? Again, it's my ego who is completely trying to grab onto whatever it can to make me feel different and special. Because true spirituality isn't a checklist, and it's definitely not a comparison or a competition. It's actually more about something that's really personal. And if there's anybody to compare ourselves to, it's ourselves. But even then, I want to be careful because If I start judging my past self for not being the way I was, or maybe because my past self didn't meditate, my past self did drink alcohol, you know, that's not good either. Again, there should be no judgment, no comparison. One thing I always found really interesting is when I hear about, some of the really highly enlightened beings. Supposedly, they do not feel superior to us. They actually even admire us, humans, for whatever we're doing. So I feel like that is something that I want to try to embrace, which is not to judge others, but also not to judge my past self. True spirituality is about being compassionate. It's about being compassionate towards others, but also towards ourselves and our own growth. And the third way that I've noticed the ego creep into spirituality is through defensiveness. And basically, it's whenever, if anybody's criticizing what you're doing, whether it's they're criticizing your spiritual practice or the way you're doing something, maybe they're criticizing you for eating meat or not eating meat or for drinking alcohol or for not drinking alcohol. And whenever you start feeling defensive about it, well, in a way, that's just your ego trying to defend its new spiritual identity. So if you're starting to think things like, well, they just don't get it, or you start getting angry, or you're wanting to make them be wrong, well, just take note of it. It probably means that that's your ego showing back up. So now I want to share 3 tips of what to do when you spot your shape shifting ego. So the first tip is show yourself some grace. I mean, the fact that you're actually even noticing your new ego form, that is a real win. I know that it's actually when I feel like I don't have an ego that I'm more worried. Because as I mentioned before, it's only when we're spiritually enlightened that we don't have an ego. So, me, I know I'm not there yet. It means that if I feel like I don't have an ego, well, it means that it's found a really good new hiding spot. And so, if you have noticed your ego and you've noticed its new shape, tap yourself on the back. That's a great first step, because if you want to start transcending this new form of ego, the first step is actually noticing it. You can't do anything about it if you don't know where it is or where it's hiding. The second tip is let your ego be your teacher. On the spiritual path, we're always talking about how everybody is our teacher, especially the ones who are challenging to us. Well, the ego is no different. And each time your ego shows up, it's showing you something that you're still attached to. It's showing you that story that you're still clinging to, or showing you a part of yourself that still needs awareness and a lot of love. So if you can start seeing your ego not as a villain, but as a teacher, the path gets a lot easier and a lot less dramatic. And I'm going to add a third tip before we get to the tarot tips, which is don't forget to laugh. I mean, our egos are hilarious. They're so silly. Mine, in any case, is it'll say things like, okay, I get it. You want to be a humble person with not an ego. Okay, I can run with that. But in that case, let's be the best humble person without an ego. Really? But come on, it's funny. I mean, if we can laugh at ourselves and not be so judgmental, well, I think the whole process will be a lot more enjoyable. So now let's move on to the fourth tip, and that is something that I'm going to get the tarot cards to help me with. Ooh, the Mother of Swords and the World. Wow, this is a really interesting combo. Let's dive in. So the Mother of Swords in the Wild Unknown is this no-nonsense owl. And I don't know about you, but she's kind of scary. I feel like she's looking deep into my soul and she's calling me on my BS. The Mother of Swords is all about discernment, and she does not let her emotions or flattery get in her way. And swords are all about the mind, and this Mother of Swords is definitely in charge of her mind and her thoughts. She has them under control. And I know that that can be sometimes counterintuitive in the spiritual world, where it's all about getting out of our mind and more into our intuition and more into our heart. But sometimes the mind is exactly the tool that we need, especially when we're dealing with shape-shifting egos. Because this Mother of Swords is just going to be able to spot our ego without judgment, without adding any emotions, and then deal with it. So the next time your ego starts shape-shifting, try to channel some of this owl's energy. See if you can spot your new ego in its new form, but then don't do it with any emotion. Don't add any drama. Don't start beating yourself over the head or thinking that you're bad for having this ego, but just notice it and then start taking the actions and steps to dismantling this new form. And then we have the World, which is the last card of the major arcana. And this card is all about integration and the cycles. It's about beginning and endings. And to me, this is a reminder that ego work is cyclical. It's not like you beat your ego once and for all and it's over. No, it's like you peel off one layer and you see something about it and you learn something about yourself, and then it shape shifts, and then it points you in a new direction. It's a new lesson that you have to learn. And there's also something about the world and having the ego be part of our world and part of who we are, part of the whole. In a way, we decided to be humans, and when we're humans, we have egos, and that's part of our experience. If we didn't want to have an experience with the ego, maybe we wouldn't have decided to be a human. Maybe we would have decided to have another experience. But while we're here, it's part of our experience and it's part of our growth. And so instead of fighting against it, we can learn to work with it. So I hope that's helped. And no matter where you're on your path with your ego that's come in a new disguise and new costume, remember, give yourself some grace. Remember to learn from it and laugh with it. Remember, you do not have to be perfect to grow. You just have to keep showing up, to keep trying, and to do it with compassion for yourself and for others. So on that, I'm wishing you lots of love and lots of laughter as you learn to dance with your ego, as you learn to laugh with it, and as you also cycle through every new growth that comes from it. I'll see you next video. Thanks so much for watching.